Hello, everyone. Hope we had a good lunch. I'm Brian Plummer. Today I'm going to be talking to you about code review. I've been doing Android development for about 8.5 years, and a developer overall for close to 14, I want to say. When I say code review, what exactly do I mean by code review? Maybe we should start by talking about that and defining it. Well, it is a process that is formal and written. It's formal because there's a protocol, an agreed upon, protocol of how we accept or reject these code reviews. And it's written in that we typically do this in a written form through source control. And when I say we, that typically implies participants. There's an author who authors the change list, who creates the code that we're reviewing. And then there's a reviewer who looks at the code and provides feedback. And that is the next part, or I guess the start of the cycle, so to speak. The reviewer provides feedback on it, and then the author incorporates that feedback. And we have a little bit of a loop here, kind of going back and forth, until the reviewer gives the thumb up, or the acknowledgement that the code can be merged into the code base. And that's kind of what code review is at a very, very high level. Let's say 10,000 meter high. And we want to say that sounds pretty easy. And, the way I described it, it does sound easy. But it's really not. And there's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's some anxiety that we have. Most people I know, when we bring up code reviews, they feel very anxious about it. They feel like it's a chore, and there's lots of reasons. Sometimes we ask ourselves, what if my suggestions are too trivial? And this happens. It's a source of anxiety. What if we feel like what we're suggesting it has no value? Or maybe, oh, there we go. I'm going too fast. Here's another one right here. What if I don't find anything wrong? It's another fear that we have, or another source of anxiety when we do code review. What if we look and we don't see anything wrong? Is there a problem with us? Is the code perfect? There we go. We just talked about that one. Here's another one. I don't understand everything that's going on here. Sometimes we feel like that is a requirement for us to review this code, to understand every little piece and understand exactly how it works. Here's another one too. What am I looking for anyways? And sometimes maybe we feel this. We don't really know where to start, or even what we should be looking for. And again, it's another source of anxiety that we have. In my country, there's something that we call math anxiety, and it has to do around math problems. People get very anxious about math problems, and it's a little unreasonable. After all, they're just math problems, and I think we kind of feel the same way about code reviews sometimes. It seems a little unreasonable. After all, we code, and it just should be a part of our daily routine. What are some things that we can do to get rid of that anxiety? And that's going to be kind of the purpose of my talk. What are some strategies that we can do to help us in this process, and of course make it easy and almost second nature? One of the things that we can do before any eyes even come to review, before any eyes get to reviewing code, I should say, we can leverage automation. And again, this is something that we can do before any eyes actively start looking at the code. We're developers. We use computers all the time. We love efficiency. We love making things efficient. So we should really try to leverage computers to do all the low-hanging fruit and to do the stuff that we don't want to do, the boring parts, so to speak. One big example of that is code formatting. I had a colleague tell me in confidence a while back, I feel uncomfortable commenting on syntax issues in pull requests. And this wasn't a junior developer. This is a senior developer. This is someone who's been coding for a while and is kind of seen as a leader. But they felt awkward pointing out syntax. And it's something that we don't really have to do. We can really leverage computers to do this for us. One example of that is we can actually format in an automated sort of fashion from Gradle. One example of that is the Google Java format, which, as the name implies, formats Java code. The other one is Pinterest KTLint, which again has a mode to where we can automate the formatting of our code without any sort of human intervention. Maybe this isn't something what you want. Another approach to do this is through Android Studio. In our editor, we have the ability to import a style and apply that style to our source. We can take it, do this apply process over the whole code base, commit it, and then disseminate the style to the other developers, and then right off the bat, right away, all the developers are creating code that is syntactically consistent. And that'll free us from the burden of having to point this out in code review, and it'll less anxiety. Another approach, let's say if the style in Square isn't really exactly what you're looking for, we can go in Android Studio and specify our own styles to whatever we want, to whatever the team agrees upon. We can configure Android Studio, export it, and then again, have all the developers on the team producing syntactically similar code. And we will be unburdened now from having to point this out in part of the review process. And it's one less thing for us to worry about. And I mentioned continuous integration earlier. If I didn't, I'm mentioning it now. It's something else that really helps us out. I think again, we should really be leveraging computers to do as much work for us as possible. And a big example of that is to make sure that the code actually compiles. If we check out someone's pull request and we run it locally to see that it builds, we're kind of wasting our time. We should really leverage a build box, whether it's Jenkins or Travis or Circle or something, to validate that the code actually compiles. And the same goes for making sure all the tests pass. We don't really want to spend time checking out a branch and running the tests ourselves just to see if they work. We can rely on our continuous integration to do that. And the same goes with linting. People can be very opinionated about it. Some people feel maybe some of the libraries aren't really worthwhile. I would disagree, and I think there's a lot of value in some forms of linting, some form of static analysis tools that we can hook up to our continuous integration and give us information. I think as humans, we're not going to be able to catch everything, and we make mistakes, and it's a really good chance for us to programmatically look for a set of common issues that we can make. Android lint is a good example, which catches a lot of stuff. And there's even some custom ones like detect, I want to say. But the bottom line is it should be a thought, and it should be something we can consider. And it will find a whole class of bugs for us that we don't have to point out ourselves as part of the review process. Another really important thing is having a style guide. And a style guide really codifies how the code should look in a way. I would say consistency at a higher level. In a style guide, we typically specify things that we're opinionated about that we can't get through continuous integration, that we can't catch through linting, but they're more higher level things. The end result of that is the code logically will contain consistency. The developers will use the APIs and the things provided for us in a nice, consistent manner. So what's typically in a style guide? One of the first things is what I would call superficial stuff. An example of that would be naming conventions or something like that. Maybe we're opinionated about it. I feel like it's a little silly, but we should definitely codify it here if we all get an agreement. And again, this is something that we could potentially do as part of the linting process through our continuous integration. Maybe we haven't spent the extra time to do that. Maybe it's not possible now. But it's typically stuff in the style guide that can be linted, but maybe with a little bit of work. Another example of that is a higher level constructs, maybe language features that we're opinionated about. For example, no int defs. Let's use enums. No async tasks, right? Things that are language specific at a very high level that, again, that we're very opinionated about, and we want to make sure that the end result is the developers, us, we're all creating consistent code between us. All right, now to the meat of the presentation. Now, this one's a little strange. It's part of the code review process. It's really good if we get out of the habit of saying you. Us as reviewers, when we're reviewing the code and we write in notes, it's it's targeted to the author, as if it could be targeted towards anyone else. And the author knows that the comment is for them. So the you is a little redundant. And, at best it's redundant. At worst, it comes off as finger pointing a little bit. You. So one example of that is you spelled error wrong. And obviously, the person is right, but it's a little redundant. It's back to the finger pointing. You. When we can say it a little nicely, or a little bit more succinctly, when we can just point out that it's a spelling issue here. It's very obvious what the fix is and what needs to be done. And we're kind of omitting the finger pointing here. And again, it's not always offensive, but again, it makes it a little nicer. And that kind of goes into my next one. Oh, here we have another one. You should move this to the conditional above. Again, you. Maybe it's a little nicer to say, this can be moved to the conditional above. It comes off a little bit nicer. And maybe if you're having a bad day as the author, it sounds a little nicer to you in your head. Another really good thing that's really important is we should frame our statements as requests and not commands. After all, we're developers, we're on the same team, we're collaborating, and when you collaborate with someone, you're not really in a position to make commands, nor should you. We're all friends, and we want to make this productive and worthwhile, and typically, with a friendly sort of conversation, is framed with requests. You don't command things from your friends or your colleagues. So that's something else that we should kind of think about, too, when we write comments. Rename this. I'm horrible at naming things, and it typically always comes out in the review process. Someone always points a finger at me, rightfully so. Again, I'm bad at picking names. Rename this. You, rename this. This sounds a little nicer. Consider renaming. Functionality unclear. Again, you're making a request. We say, consider renaming it. And we're making it very clear what the issue here is. The functionality, we don't understand what this class does because it's named horribly. But it's been very nice, and it's framed as a request. Another one that is very tough to do is to review early and to review often. Again, part of the issue here is we're not really keen on doing code review. So we kind of put it off, and then we wait, and we typically wait till we have to do it. And I think that's a little wrong-headed. I think reviewing early and reviewing often will give us lots. It gives us lots because typically when we write code, when an author produces a change list, they're typically in a holding pattern. They're waiting for review to incorporate that feedback. Or if they move on to another task, if a lot of time passed, then they typically have to do a context switch to come back and incorporate the feedback, push it back up, and allow the reviewers to apply more feedback, etc. And if we get in the habit of reviewing early, we kind of short-circuit that a little bit. We allow the author less time, or we give them, how should I say this? We cut out that context switch. We provide feedback as soon as we can, and it allows them to keep moving. Also, one of the benefits of this is affirmation. We write code. When we review the code, it's affirming of someone's work. It's giving validation to it and not sweeping it under the rug. And I think doing it early and often will help with that. One strategy that we do is to review open pull requests as part of stand-up every morning. So when you're doing your stand-up, you can look at the open PRs, and it's a signal to the authors. And maybe there's some feedback that they need to incorporate for them to do that. And it's also a signal to the reviewers, hey, there's code here that needs to be reviewed. And it's a nice daily reminder. Another strategy maybe would be to a break in the afternoon, maybe when we're feeling a little tired or we want to break from what we're currently doing. It's a nice opportunity to look at some code that isn't yours. And of course, you can point holes in it. And again, it's not your code, so as soon as it gets hairy or messy, you can walk away from it and then go back to what you're doing. But I think these types of strategies and this idea of reviewing early and reviewing often, it'll get us in the habit of looking at pull requests and performing code review in a very proactive manner. And I think it'll really cause us to be more positive about this experience and make us feel like it's just a part of a normal day as opposed to something that causes anxiety or an unloved chore. Another thing that's been really helpful is whenever we have issues, maybe sometimes we are emotional about what we say. This doesn't look right. This doesn't feel right. And again, that doesn't really help us, nor does it help the author for us to be so subjective. And what really helps is for us to tie some of our issues, or at least what we find an issue with, to a principle and not our opinion. And if we're able to do that, then we're able to at least talk about it in a very objective manner. And we can kind of remove our feelings from it, and it kind of ensures that no one's feelings get hurt. And again, we're talking about principles here, and not necessarily about feelings or opinions. And this is pretty helpful. Another really big strategy that's helped me is to start at a very high level and then kind of work your way down. What is this code doing? Trying to understand at a very large level before we dig down into the details. And there's a couple of reasons for this. If, for example, we disagree with or find fault with something, with how this is being done at a very high level, then it'll save our time. And we can bring it up and discuss it without digging deeper down. And especially if something at a very high level is incorrect or will change, then that will typically impact something at a lower level. So if you find something at fault from very high up, then you can kind of typically stop and then bring that as a discussion. And it's also a really good strategy, too, for trying to understand what this code is doing. One of the anxiety pieces I mentioned in the beginning is I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to be looking for. Or maybe I don't really understand what is going on. If we look at a very high level and we're able to abstract what is going on, then that'll kind of help us, and then we can kind of drill down into the implementation. And maybe we don't have to understand exactly what the low-level pieces are doing. Us understanding at a very high level and then kind of working our way down will be really helpful. And maybe we don't have to understand everything that's going on, but at least it'll give us enough to where we can review the code, provide feedback. One amazing thing that I love as part of the review process is providing code examples. It's so easy for someone to say, hey, there's a better way to do this. And that's it. And then the author has to go do a little research, find that better way. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. They surface it, and the reviewer says, no, I meant this way. So sometimes when we review code, it's really advantageous and helpful to us to just provide an example. Instead of saying, hey, you're doing this wrong, or you can do it like this, we can provide an example. A while back, I was converting some Kotlin code, and there was a Guava helper class to build an immutable map. And I did the Kotlin conversion, and a reviewer saw this. I was using this immutable map.builder, and I was completely unaware at the time that Kotlin had a built-in language feature that gave me exactly what I wanted. And this person was able to point that out. And not only were they able to point that out, but they provided an example, something nice, succinct. I could look at it, I could see exactly what it was doing, and I could learn from it. It really helps us as developers and our team grow. If we can teach the junior people, then that illustrates that we know it and we can teach it to someone that's junior. And if the junior person can do this to us as well, then that's good as well. They can find an issue and provide an example and go through the actual work of doing this, and it's really nice. I heard someone compare this as a gift, a code gift in the review process. And I really like that. But it's something that's really nice, and I think that us striving to do this more will really make the review process better and less painful. Something I have a hard time with, limiting responses on repeated issues. We're humans. We're really keen, we're really good at identifying patterns, finding things that are wrong. We see something in someone's pull request that's wrong, and then they do it 1,000 times, and we get lots of joy from pointing that out. And of course we feel like we're very clever and very smart, finding one here, maybe another one there, and we kind of keep going. And I assure you, the reviewer feels like they're doing something positive or they're being clever, but it's a little oppressive to the author. And the author knows, all you have to do is pointing out once, and the author knows everywhere where they made this mistake. And it's a lot easier just to say, this is could you consider renaming this? This goes against the style guide. This needs to be fixed. And I assure you, the author knows all the places that they did this wrong, and you don't really have to point it out 1,000,000 times. Another thing that I really enjoy is offering praise, sincere praise. I think a lot of times we have the opinion that pull requests are just forums for pointing out issues, pointing out things that are wrong, pointing out things that can be made better. And we often don't take the time to offer sincere praise. And I think it's something that we should do. Certainly when something delights us and we want to convey that delight, it's a really good thing to do. I know when I'm reviewing code and I see someone does a little bit of cleanup, I love that. And I want to go out of my way to say, hey, thank you. I appreciate that. Sometimes if developers are writing a feature or something that we're excited about overall, it's perfectly okay to say that too. I'm really excited to check out this feature. Thank you. I can't wait for this to be merged in and check this feature out. I'm really excited. And I think a lot of that will really go a long way. Even in some situations, as I mentioned in the beginning, what if I don't find anything? Or what do I have to say? Sometimes it's a nice, easy out. And again, it has to be sincere, and it shows that you've read the PR to say, hey, I like what you did here. I like what you did over here. And that can be it. And it shows that you've read it, and it's praise. And it's sincere if you really did like it. And then it's really helpful. And it also has the side effect of positive reinforcement of us communicating and letting someone know, hey, good job. And so maybe the next time they'll continue to do that good job. And we all need to be lifted up sometimes. Oh, so this one I had a little bit of a hard time with. I wrote this slide initially without realizing that maybe the French use a different letter grade. So please forgive me. Americans, as you probably know, we have letter grades in our academic system. And you can kind of think of them as maybe standard deviations on a bell curve. I put a little graph up here to kind of help us out, so you kind of know what I mean by that. And the idea behind that is we don't really, the expectation that someone who maybe does a change list at a really low level, the expectation that that is going to be perfect when it gets merged in is wrong. I think we should aim to improve the code by a letter grade incrementally. And what this will do is the code going in will be better, and it allows the developer to get kind of better over time. Meaning if, let's say a developer starts at a D, an 8 or a 9, and through feedback, they get the code up to a C+ or a B, maybe. That code goes in, and I guarantee you the next pull request that developer does will be at a higher level. And again, the idea that getting the code in perfect every single time is a little unreasonable, and we should aim to make it kind of incrementally better, and in doing so, the teammates will be better themselves. And the code going forward, we're going to raise the baseline as they go. One thing that's really difficult when reviewing code is reviewing large change lists. Not sure if you have a number, but you should definitely think of a number for your team. And you can say any change list that is longer than 2,000 lines, 3,000 lines, whatever that number is, needs to be split up. I feel that us understanding a code, the complexity involved, the mental effort to see what is going on, it doesn't rise linearly with the lines of code. It kind of goes up a little higher. And I think that having such large pull requests is a real detriment. We already have issues with wanting to review code. Having voluminous code review just makes it even worse. So one really great strategy is to split up these big code changes. And one way to do that is to, I guess, start from the leaf nodes and kind of work your way up. An example of that would be you have a feature. Feature has value objects or data classes. Nothing really depends on these value objects. That can be your first change list. The second change list is maybe the business logic that manipulates these objects. And then lastly, maybe the UI that actually leverages the business logic and the value objects as well. And you can kind of separate out your pull requests to do that. Everyone will be very grateful of you for doing it, and no finger wagging saying, hey, break this up when it comes to review time. Even if we think about that when we review our code, if we think about that when we are writing our code or when we go to submit it, it'll help us tremendously. Oh, this one's tough. Respecting the scope of the review. A lot of the times, we're looking at someone's pull request, and we're looking around the lines that were changed, and we see something that we don't like, but it's a little bit above or a little bit below of what has been changed. And we want to point that out. We want to make things better. But it's not really fair. The developer is changing just something around it, but not necessarily that. And that is kind of pointing outside of the scope of the review. And it's really tough for us to refrain from that. And it happens to me a lot. Some strategies that we can do to overcome this is we all use kind of ticketing systems to record issues. As if it's something that really bothers us, we can create an issue for it, a ticket, and then we can kind of fix it a little later on. We could also if we're a really close team, we can also check out the code and maybe fix it ourselves real quick and then push it back up if you have that sort of relationship with your teammates. But we're going to have to resist the urge to point out code that's out of scope of the review. It's very, very tough. One thing that I really enjoy, if your source control supports this, is labels. And GitHub has a really, really great interface for that, to where you can color code things. And here's a good example of stuff. Oh, there we go. And so right away, we're kind of given a visual indicator of what this PR kind of is. Is it enhancement? Is it a bug fix? Is it Kotlin? Maybe we're trying to get our developers to write more Kotlin so we can annotate our pull requests with Kotlin. Or maybe it has tests. And again, we want our developers to write tests, so it's a good gamification. We can add this code if our pull request has tests. But it's really nice because it gives us a visual indicator of kind of what the code is doing. And it allows us to put on certain type of glasses or optics for how we want to view this code. If it's a performance fix, then we can look at the code with performance glasses. Is this making stuff faster? If it's a critical bug fix, maybe it's just a Band-Aid, right? We don't necessarily want to do a real fix. This is a hot fix. So one of the pieces of anxiety that I mentioned in the beginning was, I don't even know what I'm looking for. This will kind of help us with that. In addition to the words, we can kind of see generally what this code or what this change should be doing, maybe in about a category. And I would really recommend that if you're using GitHub, to take advantage of labels and to add your own in here, whatever it makes sense for you. But it's something that's there and brings a lot of value. Something that I started doing that I really enjoy is if you're reviewing a change list and the outstanding issues are just trivial, then we can kind of denote that and approve the pull request. And then we can rely on the author to make that decision for him or herself if they want to fix these issues or move on. Maybe sometimes they're time constrained and they just want the code in. And again, these are trivial issues. Maybe they have a little bit extra time and they want to do it 100% right. Then they can address these trivial issues before the code gets merged. And the mechanism to really facilitate this is, again, back to the protocol. We use a word, nitpick. So when we write a comment on a PR, we can use this word, or at least we do in my team, to denote whether an issue is trivial. Nitpick, you can kind of do this. And again, it's not something that's super important. It's superficial and it's trivial, and we're communicating that to the author. And it's really nice because, again, it's almost giving ourselves personal freedom and some latitude. We're not demanding, we're making requests, and again, sometimes we're short on time, and sometimes we have a little bit of extra time, and I think this goes a long way, the flexibility that this affords us. Another problem that arises is stalemates in the code review process. And a stalemate is when an author will not make any more changes and a reviewer will not accept the code. And you're kind of at an impasse, a headbutt, a stalemate. So what can we do to get around this? Well, if you find yourself in this situation, you got to do something. And it's typically one way to do it is to get and talk to the other person and just talk about it, figure out. Because a lot of times we write stuff and it comes across one way. Sometimes it's a little bit easier if we just discuss things in person. Another really good strategy to get us out of this situation is to involve a third party, someone who is pretty objective to it and can actually triage the situation and allow us to move forward. But don't get stuck in the mud with this, and definitely move on. And that's it. Merci. I would like to encourage everyone. Hopefully everyone will enjoy code reviews a little bit more. And that's it. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. Thank you.
Testing. Thanks for your talk, very interesting. I had a question because you mentioned the style guide. I tried sort of starting that with our team of developers. I think it's kind of difficult because in order for everyone to sort of follow the style guide, they have to understand it, they have to be able to participate in it. So it's hard to sort of set up a way that everyone can kind of contribute to the style guide and add their own elements to it. So do you have any tips on that? Do you have a specific way that you work and that you develop the style guide with your team?
Sure. So maybe having it as part of the source control, so it's right there. Maybe having it in separate places. We're coding. Where do I go and look for this style guide? Where is it? Is it in Confluence? Is it somewhere else? Maybe having that just in the source control. It's convenient. It's there. If we want to make changes to it, it can actually be part of the review process as well. Team meetings, engineering meetings, typically are good forums for that sort of discussion. If part of the review process, people get contentious and something isn't already in the style guide, that's when you say, hey, let's talk about it later. It's not in the style guide. We should move on. You can't really bring it up because it's not in the style guide. Let's table it. Let's talk about it as a group and come to a consensus. I think maybe with some onboarding with some junior people, maybe them not understanding everything, then maybe that's okay. Maybe understanding that people are going to get it wrong and providing some explanation and some mentoring, I guess, would help with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, you were mentioning trying to keep the changes small, which is something I like a lot, but I happen to work with a team with very different time zone, and the problem is that if you make very small pull requests, sometimes you get the people on the other side get stale because they can't make any more progress until they get reviewed. And one way we have found to kind of work around this is to not make separate pull requests, but make sure that the commits are really well separate, and add in the pull request saying better reviewed commit by commit. I wonder what you think about this.
Oh, no, that's a great strategy, too. And I think it's whatever works on a per-team basis and whatever really makes sense and allows us to get value from the review process. Another example of that is if you have a large change list and you don't want to break it up, one good solution or strategy is to have people review different pieces of it. No one says you have to review every single line, or every aspect of every single line. And we can always split that up. Walter here will take the first 100 lines, Sophia will take the next 100 lines, and, so on and so forth. And I think that's the real thing here, is to allow the code to keep moving, allow us to review it, and in a way that's not oppressive, in a way that fosters learning and getting the code in and moving forward. So, whatever works. Great question.
Curious question. How strict do you try to keep to just watching the code as opposed to also watching the code and fire up the app to see what the app is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the big reasons for code review is to catch cardinal sins, what I call cardinal sins. We want to make sure that we're not doing anything really, really wrong, and most everything else can slide. That's not to say that we don't care about the code or we shouldn't be checking. I just, as I mentioned before, the emphasis should really be bringing it up a letter grade. It depends. I think that looking at the code and checking out the code and running the app and seeing, there's a time and a place for that. And I think that that shows due diligence. And I did not mean to imply that it's a complete waste of time checking out someone's code and running it. I think we can do that if we're curious, and it really helps to do that sometimes, and especially if someone's junior and we just kind of want to double check what's going on, then it's absolutely appropriate. I was kind of meaning more the other extreme with every single time, if that were a part of your review process to check out the code and build it, it might be a little bit much, but I think that occasionally, or at least when we're in doubt or when we're curious, absolutely. And I've done that quite a number of times.
Hi. I was thinking about the review early, review often. I've been in teams where I've gotten several code reviews a day. And I was wondering if you have any suggestion how to balance between reviewing and continuing on your own features.
Oh, that's a really great question. I think if context switching is very hard for you, then maybe a point in the day when you have natural breaks, or when you want to take a break from your code, it's a really good opportunity for that. I used to call pull requests algorithmic babies. I'm to the point now to where kids look kind of cute, but maybe I still don't want one. And, someone will give me a baby, and I like to hold it, but as soon as it starts crying or something, I can give it back. And I think that the change lists are kind of similar. You can, look at it, and, oh, it's so nice and so sweet, and interact with it. But as soon as you get tired of it, or as soon as it starts to cry, you can kind of give it back. And I feel like, maybe looking at it like that, maybe is one thing to do, is not seeing it as a chore, as something that we have the opportunity to do. But to really answer your question, maybe there's something you do in the course of your day that kind of lends itself to that. You go and you have coffee at 4, and there's a natural break, and you already are in that mindset of, I want to take a break from what I'm doing. I also mentioned going over the pull request as part of a stand-up. That's a really nice way to do that too. And maybe even that 15 or 20 minutes after stand-up, you could sit down and review some code as well. But that would be one strategy, is to maybe pick times throughout the day, and you can say, these are my times to review, where it doesn't hinder you or keep you from your work. I hope that helps.
Do you have advice to onboard new team members or to make to help people make better reviews during the process?
Yeah, I think a good bit of what I said, and that is, again, not being hung up on trying to understand everything, feeling like we can say positive things as well, talking, just doing it as well. I think, a lot of math anxiety comes from we're scared of math, we don't ever want to do it, and the only time we do it is when we have to do it or when we're forced to do it. And I think that if we maybe have, get in the habit of looking at it and get in the habit of being opinionated about it or looking at it. Again, in the beginning a developer, it'll kind of be tough because they may not have anything to say. And again, they'll have anxiety because they'll look at the code and I don't see anything wrong. And that's okay. You have to start somewhere. And that's what this is about. It's about learning, and it's about getting everyone on the team on the same page. And that's kind of what it's really about. So I guess maybe reviewing more, looking at other people's comments to kind of see, what people are saying or what people are doing or patterns in the code that people are doing. Those are all some good tactics. And just try not to be afraid. This is a learning mechanism, and this is how we learn as a group. To really embrace that and to help us. So.
Hi. How do you make sure that if you improve one grade every time, that the C+ level is not spreading in the code base?
Well, again, I think the big thing here is to catch the main reason, I guess, for my mind for code review is to catch cardinal sins, as I mentioned, and to learn. If those two weren't important, then we would just contribute right to the code base, right? What's the whole point of having a review? And we're not going to make things perfect right out of the gate. And I think that as part of the review process, it really is about making things better. And it's this peer pressure of, making stuff better. And if we don't, then we deteriorates and it's apathy, and I think there's bigger problems than just your review process. But I think the review process itself will foster learning, and it will foster making things better. And I think that just by participating in it, providing feedback, looking at stuff, going through the motions, you will get better. Looking at code more, I can't see how you would be a worse coder looking at code more. Even if it's bad code, then maybe you can start to see that. At least that's my opinion. I hope that helps.
Thanks for the talk. My question is about deadlines. So how do you suggest to deal with deadlines? Because code reviews sometimes can be literally endless, and the feature should be shipped on time.
Sure. So as I kind of mentioned, bringing it up a letter grade, if the code reviews are endless, then you're kind of approaching it wrong. Your expectations are that this will be perfect. And again, it's really hard for us to do sometimes. Sometimes it's oppressive, and it's unreasonable to expect that from our colleagues. We can just get it in the code and then move forward and then address stuff. One example of this is maybe our implementation is horrible. We can put it behind an interface, and we can iterate on that implementation. I'm really not sure. And again, this is all strategies around a team. Is it mission critical? Does it have to be perfect? Well, maybe we can have a working branch that we review code into, going into the working branch, and we make this better. And then before that change actually gets into the real branch, it's already been reviewed a few times, and the expectation is a little higher. I think setting ourselves up for that, for the expectation that, it's not going to be perfect. We may have to do a little bit of work later. That's all fine. But I think being deadlocked in this review and feedback cycle for days and days and days and days, it is oppressive. And I think, as a team, there are strategies to get around that, whatever it may be. I'm good. I could do one more, a couple more, or... Are we done? One more.
My question is, can the letter grading be badly perceived because you are giving scores to developers?
It's not really about even giving scores. It's more of a mindset, as I kind of mentioned, this expectation that you're working with a junior developer or something, and the code that they will produce will be perfect standards or to a very, very high standard, and that's a little unreasonable. I think that, again, the purpose of this is to code review is to identify cardinal sins, things that are very, very wrong, and to learn. And I think that this will facilitate it, at least this mindset, having this idea that we're going to improve, that we're going to make better, and you don't actually tell the person that, hey, this code is an F, but we're going to bring you up to a C. Again, it's the mindset of what our expectations are as developers, and of course, we want things to be efficient, and, we want things to be perfect, whatever the hell that is, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen or that it's reasonable for it to happen, and that's all. Just that mindset of we're going to make incrementally better changes, and that this developer, the code that is produced, will get better over time. We're bringing them up a level, and the next time they'll start at that next level they were initially. Thank you so much. I really appreciated giving this talk. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.